Okay, it's time for another one of our preseasoning conversations with one of the 14 head coaches around ACC baseball. This is ACC Baseball, etc., presented by Pitch Logic, the system used by players, coaches, scouts, and instructors at all levels of play, from youth leagues to the big leagues. The easy-to-use and affordable technology makes the platform accessible to every player at every level. All the metrics and features used at the highest level. You can go to pitchlogic.com for more information. Darren Vaught here. Howdy. I'm glad to be joined by the newest face in the ACC head coaching circles. It is first-year head coach at Boston College, Todd Interdonato. And Todd, I told you, you are the new face. There's, of course, a first-year head coach in Miami in J.D. Arteaga, but he's been the pitching coach there forever. So we know him. I'm looking forward to getting to know you as you start your journey here at BC. But I hope the offseason treated you well and hope you're doing well today.
We are doing great. The move here has been nothing short of exceptional. My wife and girls and I, we love living in this part of the country, and we're just excited to be here. And, you know, a lot of moving and a lot of transition, and now you're getting towards the season. So starting to feel like a baseball coach again.
Nice. Well, let me ask this on a personal level. What was like the first, other than the logistically getting there and moving and finding a home or whatever, what was the first order of business? Did you need, you needed to scope out a coffee place? What would have been next on your agenda?
So the easy professional answer is hiring a staff, right? But let's get past that, right? Like finding a place to live, very easy in Boston, Massachusetts. If you've never experienced it, housing up here is very cheap, very affordable. It's all very easy. Hiring a staff, obviously no problem. You know, that was a cinch. But honestly, once you get here, you know, for me, it was, I think a lot of people would tell you this, it was just trying to create a routine, right? Like, what time do you go to the office? How are you spending time with your family in the morning? You know, I was at the same place for 18 years, and, I met my wife in South Carolina. Our daughters were born in South Carolina. We developed a routine together, right? So we had a pretty good routine. You know, the girls are in 4th and 2nd grade now. And over the last, really since they've been going to preschool, we developed a pretty good routine. And then now, you just kind of blow it up and figure it out. But it took a few months to try to hammer down, how we do that. My wife does a really good job. Full-time employee, works for a Fortune 500 company. She handles the girls in the afternoon. My responsibility is in the morning, which I try to keep pretty sacred, to tell you the truth. So it was like, oh, I'll drive them to school. Well, the school is half a mile away. Like, okay, well, now we're going to walk so we can actually spend some time together, as opposed to being in the car for 30 seconds. Let's actually walk for 10 minutes. Then it snowed and I reconsidered the entire thing. So
yeah. I like that. I get grief a lot of the times. I told you I'm on the road for a broadcast now, but if I'm ever anywhere and like, for instance, right now, as we're recording this, I'm in downtown Wichita, Kansas, and I'm looking for a coffee place. And if it's within, a mile, I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll walk. What's a mile? Yeah. 20 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes I catch grief from other media members in that I don't, I want to walk a mile or a mile and a half instead, just to get the activity in and maybe see a little bit of the city. So I can appreciate the walk. That's perfect to get the time in.
Absolutely.
What about BC enticed you the most? And I promise we're going to get to the 2024 version of your team, and this is a preseason conversation, but just because we haven't been able to talk since your hiring, what about that program and that school and that area was most enticing?
Well, the easiest way to say it is it was just a 3 for 3, right? And I know when people look at jobs and people talk about, okay, do I want to take this job? Or even when they're looking at it from a third party perspective, oh, I think that guy should take this job. To me, it comes down to 3 things. Like, number one, is it good for your family? Mainly, do you feel like you are going to improve your family's lifestyle, right? I told you our girls are young. They're in 2nd and 4th grade. That was hands down maybe the biggest factor. Is this an area that we're going to move to that improves their lives? combining with that is, does it work for my wife, right? Is she able to still keep her job? My wife is very successful in what she does. She works for Michelin Tire. She's worked really hard to climb the ladder, so to speak. And, we weren't interested in going to a place where she would have to leave that. So having that organized where she could keep that job, that family aspect maybe is most important. The second one is, I've been spoiled to work at really good institutions my entire career, right? Like Wofford is just a phenomenal institution. And so that was really, the more we got into looking at different places and talking to different people, it was amazing how much the forefront of the institution came to my mind, right? We want to build a program on top of an institution, not alongside it, or certainly in spite of it. And then the last one is, this is, as you really look down, to me, this is my favorite league, right? Like, this is me personally, when you're talking about as a coach, because I do really believe, from an outsider's perspective, and now 6 months of being an insider, the ACC is legitimately trying to hold on to the true student athlete experience, right? They are legitimately trying to hold on to that. And for me personally, that's really important. Like, that's really important to me, that we hang on to what the true student athlete was originally designed to do. And I thought the SoCon did a phenomenal job of that. I thought our head coaches in the SoCon had that at the forefront. And then in our team meetings, in our head coaches meetings, when we talked about our teams, that was a common sentiment amongst the head coaches, was keeping it the true student athlete experience. And when I got here and talking to different coaches in this league, and then a few meetings that I've been in, you can see that's there. So the perception that I had of the league has certainly come to fruition. And that's really why this was the league that, if we ever had a chance to leave and we ever had a chance to make a move, we were hoping we would land in this league, and we're fortunate enough to do so.
While you were mentioning Wofford there, it just occurred to me that you coached at Wofford for a long time, parallel to Mike Young, who's now the men's basketball coach at Virginia Tech. Did you reach out to him? Did you guys have that kind of relationship about, hey, jump into the ACC, that sort of thing? That's my guy, by the way, because he went to Emory and Henry College, and that's right, where I went for my undergrad in Virginia. So, and we grew up in a similar part of the world, close proximity, obviously different times, but no, Mike's my guy. So this is more of a personal, for me, question more than anything. But I'm curious if you reached out to him or anybody about making this jump.
Well, Mike, first of all, Mike is the best, right? Like, I would love to say Mike and I probably worked alongside each other. I was there for 18 years. I feel like he was maybe only at Virginia Tech for my last 3 or 4. Yeah. Maybe somewhere in there, I could be a year or 2 off. So I worked alongside of him for 12 or 13 years. And in my first handful of years there, I didn't really know him, right? Mike is the best, but he's also a very unique personality. And as a young head coach, you're just like, I'm just going to kind of leave that guy alone, right? Like, it was the same way with Mike Ayers. He was there forever, and phenomenal coach, unique personality. And then I remember vividly walking through our student union at Wofford, walking out to go to practice, and Mike was sitting there eating a sandwich, and he just happened to be by himself. And I was walking through there, and I was on the way to practice, and he just stopped me. This was it was January of, I'm guessing probably like 2010 or 2011. And it was like, he had kind of, I guess I had kind of checked some boxes for him where he felt like it was worth investing some time in me as a young head coach. And we just had this very, very Mike Young unique conversation, that the conversations you can only have with Mike Young. And from there, he was phenomenal. Mike and I had a ton of conversations kind of off script or off to the side while I was at Wofford. And then he was one of the first ones to reach out. And not only did he reach out via text message, but when I got to the office at BC, you have mail pile up, right? Like, they come in like, oh, we didn't know you were working. Here's the pile of mail that it's shut up the last 3 weeks. And of course, at the top of the pile is a handwritten note from Virginia Tech basketball. And it's just like, so on brand for Mike, right? Like, so on brand. So, and then Kevin Giltner, who was his assistant, was a real good friend of ours while he was in Spartanburg as well. So just, Kevin and him. So yes, the short answer is, yeah, talk to Mike Young since we did this. And he's one of the first to reach out, both text and handwritten, which is just so cool.
Very cool. With that with that in mind, how are new relationships with other head coaches at a new institution there at BC coming along?
Great. The first guy to greet me, we do the introductory, we do all that. I come down, I do all the official stuff, and the first guy to greet me is Jeff Halfley, our football coach. And I walk down, and he's holding a bag of gear, and he's like, "Hey, I know at your previous institution you were Adidas. I know you're New Balance here, but we have this weird thing where football is Adidas too. So if you like Adidas, man, here's a bag of Adidas gear," and just hand me a bag of like full Adidas BC football gear. And then Earl, coming from CSC, was great. Joanna, our women's basketball coach, Greg Brown, our hockey coach, and then even all the way through Jason in volleyball and Acacia in lacrosse. It's just the welcome from the other head coaches has been, it's been way more than we expected. And everybody told us it was coming. And I'm like, yeah, like everybody says that. But now it actually is way more than we anticipated.
That's great. So cool. All right, well, let's talk about coaching this team now. As you head into your first season at the helm, what was it like, sort of warming up to a team rather than vice versa for the first time in a long time? Right, like you see the guys for the first time in the fall. A lot of returners to what was already a pretty good BC team, and we'll talk about those guys. But just more generally speaking, you're the new guy, whereas normally you're welcoming guys back. You're welcoming new students, new athletes to your program. What was that like in the fall?
Weird. It was really weird. Like I said, 18 years at one place, you feel like you have your hands, or at least an understanding of almost every small aspect of the program. And as opposed to worrying about what it was, I was trying to figure out who was which name. Right. Like, and all of a sudden I'm looking down, I'm like, is that Charlie Kuhn or is that Evan Moore? Like, well, I know one's left-handed and one's right-handed. So I'll wait for one to throw a baseball and then I'll figure out which one it is. That's like the first couple of weeks. But, really to get into a little bit of kind of my mindset going in, was my main objective was to try to build trust. That was the whole thing, right? Like, how do I build trust? How do I get them to trust me? So in season, when there's a difficult decision to be made or a difficult conversation to be had, or holding them accountable to a mistake and doing it the way that frankly, I'm used to doing it. That was really the big thing that I noticed when I thought introspectively, was I was just used to saying things with 17 years of tenure behind it. And coming in here, I had no tenure. I had no trust, other than the fact that they had to put their faith in the administration, made a good hire. Right. And that's not a good enough reason for college age kids, right? You have to build your own trust. So that was my mentality coming in, was I just need to build trust with these guys in terms of organization, getting them to focus on the right things, maybe a little bit of my knowledge of the game, mainly making sure I was in it for the right reasons, trying to develop them, trying to build trust in every layer that coaches know. So that was really my main area of focus. Because like you said, Darren, like, I was the new guy, right? I was the new kid. And no different from when a recruit comes in, every upperclassman is like, can I trust this guy? Can I trust him to show up on time? Can I trust him to practice hard? Can I trust him to get a bunt down? Can I trust him to execute a 3-2 slider? Like, I just kind of had the same mentality and same mindset when I thought about the way they viewed me.
Yeah. And it's not to sort of single you out, but as the head coach, you're like the leader in the newness, right?
Yeah.
So you, along with your staff, have maybe convincing isn't the right word, but it is building that trust, earning that trust, selling guys who are coming back, especially in a 2024 of college athletics, where it would be pretty easy and pretty understandable for a good player there to jump ship and go somewhere else without the head coach that they've been playing for so long. But man, I look at this roster, and there are so many key pieces from last year that have stayed and decided to. And I think it's a credit to a lot of things, probably the institution as a whole and the culture there. What Mike did for so long there with the culture of the program specifically. And it seems to me, Todd, like it's been a pretty seamless, like, passing a baton. I don't even know if you and Mike Gambino, of course, the former BC coach, have had conversations, but it just seems like a pretty seamless passing, because I look at, and look, this is a program that's got some tradition to it, in the sense that you guys just recently had your banquet at Fenway. There's the partnership there. You had successful alums who are in the big leagues now come back for that. Those are relationships that you did not have prior to being the head coach at Boston College. And you've even got a recent alum on your staff, as Henry Leak is your pitching development guy. It seems like those are things that would have happened probably even with the old coaching staff around. So it seems like, at least from a cultural standpoint, it's been a pretty smooth transition. What's it been like from your perspective?
Could not agree more, right? Could not agree more. And I'll answer one of those questions. Mike and I have had a good relationship for the last 15 years, really, since he took the job at BC, because we hired Greg Sullivan at Wofford. So we hired Greg Sullivan from Newberry. Mike was his best reference. He works at Wofford for 6 weeks, tells me he's not going to leave for 2 years. And then Mike tells me he's not going to hire him. And then Mike calls me 2 weeks later and says, "Oh, I'm kidding. I'm going to hire him anyway." So then when Greg came back to BC after that, I got to know Mike really well. Greg and I developed a good friendship. And so I knew that was really where, knowing Mike as well as I did, how much, as an alumni of BC, how much he valued the right characteristics in players. I had a sense that the right human beings were in the locker room, right? And then you meet Henry, who you mentioned, and I meet Henry and I'm like, oh yeah, this guy's on brand for what everybody said he was, right? Like, and then, the institution's certainly the most powerful reason in this. But then, once Mike took the job at Penn State, and, Kevin Vance was already gone at that point. Tyler Holt was already gone at that point. The only two people on staff at that point were Mike and Greg, right? So Mike leaves. Now there's legitimately one coach on staff. I mean, you talk about setting the apple for this whole thing to get blown up. And somehow you look here in January and you're like, you got a lot of people coming back. I think there's a lot in the institution. I think there's a lot of camaraderie in that locker room. And then I think really what held it together was Greg Sullivan through the summer, going around doing home visits, telling everybody, hey, we're going to get the right guy. This place is going to attract the right people. And then us being able to keep him on staff. Like I said, Greg and I had a friendship for 15 years. And I think him going around, once it came to light that, I was going to be fortunate enough to be put in this position. I think the fact that he and I had a relationship, he could go into those homes and be like, hey, this is a good hire. You can trust this guy. And I know he did that because he's never told me that, but all the players have told me that separately. That we got a layer, we were thinking about it. We were thinking we were going to stay. And then Sol comes around and says, hey man, you're going to like playing for this guy. You're going to like this. So there's a lot of things that are on the surface that look like it kept it together, but I always have to give Sol credit for behind the scenes, below the surface. He was the one massaging those relationships and making sure those guys felt good. And I want those guys, all those guys who could have left, which in this day and age is 3/4 of your roster. I want those guys to feel good about making this decision to stay, right? That goes back to the trust, right? We want those guys to be like, yeah, I'm going to stay. Like, I love BC and this is where I want to graduate from. But also at the same time, I hope that our staff, as we come in, it cements their decision or it reassures their decision to stay. You'd have to ask them that. I don't know where they stand on it now, right? You have to ask them how they feel about it 6 months in.
Well, I look at the roster and you talk about sort of getting that trust on the front end with guys like, Cole Mercado's going into a sophomore year. Patrick Roche is back as a senior. Cam Leary to be back as a senior. Vince Cimini as a senior. And just, like I covered this team several times last year, and they're all names that played huge roles in the team's success. Barry Walsh is a graduate. Sam McNulty made huge strides as a young infielder last year. He's back. Johnny West and Joey Ryan. Like, there are, I don't know that there are first year head coaches that jump into this and have that kind of success with retention. With that being said, there's a learning curve there too, right? Because when you talk about a player's development, if we're gonna key in on maybe some individuals, you weren't there last year on a day in day out basis, so it's a little bit harder for you to evaluate how they have progressed, right? Does that make it easier in your mind because you're sort of just looking at it at a surface level, right? Like with Cam Leary, what is sure you can pull up his numbers from previous seasons, but what is what you're seeing day in and day out, and it almost sort of simplifies the evaluation process.
For sure, right? Like I was actually having a conversation with John the other day, and I said of all the people who I watched on film, which I watched all of them, right? When I watched Cam Leary hit on film, and then I watched him hit in the cage, there's a lot of similarities. Now, I could not have been more wrong on Cam Leary and Nick Wang's personality. I have said that repeatedly. I was so far off on those two guys, man. And to the positive, right? Like I was lukewarm watching him play. And then now being around, I'm like, this guy's personality is way different than I anticipated. But John West was the one who, watching him on film and then watching him throw live, was the biggest gap. Right. I knew he had success. I knew he, had that stretch of 6 or 7 starts at the back end of last year where he was as good as anybody in the league. I'm watching him and I know he's a monster, right? I know he's 6'8" or whatever he is, and he's built well. And I'm like watching him on film and I'm like, okay. And then I watch him throw for the first time, like, oh, there is a sizable gap between the way it looks on film and the way it looks in person. He was the one that really surprised me in terms of that. I actually made this comment to a couple players this last week. Through the whole first semester, I felt like a consultant. You're just evaluating everything. How have you guys practiced? How has this gone in the past? How do you guys do individuals? And Sol has been my sounding board, right? Hey, how have you guys done this? He's like, this is the way we did it. I go, did you like doing it that way or did you not like doing it that way? Okay, like when you say this is what they know, do you agree with the way that was taught or would you have adjusted the way that was taught? Like, I understand this is the way you did things, because to me, and I actually had this conversation with Mike when we were in Dallas, even if I could have gone back to Wofford after 18 years and said, okay, wipe the slate clean, I would have adjusted some things, right? That's not an indictment on the way they did. It's just, getting fresh eyes on something. And so the consultant aspect, but this is really where coming back after the break, walking in, I no longer feel like a consultant. I no longer feel like I'm in eval mode. I feel like I am in coaching and development mode. And I don't know why I feel like that, but that's just the way I feel. Like I felt like full consultant all the way through the end of the winter. And then now at the beginning of the spring, I feel like I've got my feet underneath me, and I honestly feel much more like myself in the last 10 days than I did at any point in the fall.
Yeah, man, I love to hear that. Obviously for you personally, right? It's better to be comfortable in a new place. I do think it's just partially nature of the circumstance, right? Like that is a weird period of time that is necessary to inherit the players that you've inherited and that sort of thing. I think it would be understandable if a lot of their roles remained similar from this time last year. How do you see it? Are you sort of rigid with your perception of who's going to be what for you at this point? Is there some fluidity still in terms of, if you had to write down a lineup today and a weekend rotation today, are you confident that that's the one that, assuming everybody's healthy and plays the way that they can and you would expect them to, that would be it would be the same throughout the season?
It's interesting, right? Like one of my favorite things to do, and this is such a nerdy baseball coach thing, like, but it's always interesting. Like when you bring in new recruits, you're like, hey, we're going to do pop-up priority, go to the position you feel most comfortable. And I would always do that at Wofford because I would just want to see where they would go. Like I knew the perception I had with them, right? Like, hey, I think this guy profiles it. He's a shortstop in high school. I think he profiles as a third baseman. Let's see where he goes for pop-up priority. And I did the same thing here. I was like, hey, we're going to do pop-up priority. Go to your spots. and just like watching where everybody ran, right? That was like one of the things I'm like, let's see if Barry Walsh does run the center field, right? Like, let's see if Vin runs the short or if he runs the second, right? Because at the beginning of the year, is their starting shortstop. At the end of the year, he was their starting second baseman, right? Like, and so that was so interesting to me. I will tell you what, if you were to write a lineup as somebody that has not been here, and you were to say, okay, I would project a position player. I'd put Barry in center. I'd put Cole Mercado in right. I'd put Cam Leary in left. I'd put Wang at third, McNulty at short, Samini at second, maybe Kyle Wolf at first, and Landwehr behind the plate. Like, if you were to do it based on looking from the outside in, I will tell you those decisions on the position player side of the ball are probably going to fall more in line with what's perceived. You talk about fluidity, like our running joke in here, and we're sitting in this locker room and all of our coaches are literally sitting right here. Like, the position player seems to be like, well, yeah, like that seems right. And then we get into the pitching side of it of who's going to be a weekend starter and who's going to pitch out of the pen. And anytime I bring up any role, Henry Leak just like kind of wigs out because he just has this uncertainty of like where he's supposed to go. And then Ryan's so go with the flow. He's like, yeah, we're good. And then, it's just that conversation of how those roles on the pitching side, that is certainly much more fluid of how we want to handle that and what we want to do. The position player side is probably a little more predictable. The pitching side is certainly more fluid and what they want to do.
I love giving them the choice of going where they are most comfortable. So Todd, I had a job interview one time, and it was with two people. It was with the CEO of a company and the vice president, who would in turn, after I got the job, nailed it, would be my supervisor. And this has been maybe a dozen years ago. So I was a young working professional at the time. And
you're still a young working professional, by the way.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah. They had at their office, they had this massive conference room with just a big conference table, right? So there's probably 20 seats all around it. And when I get there, I walk in and they are sat down in two seats in one of the short corners. It's a rectangular table. And without even really saying it in a way that allowed me to think about it, they kind of were like, okay, we'll sit anywhere you'd like.
Mm-hmm.
So I sit down, we get started with the interview. Like the second or third question is, why'd you choose that seat? Why did you sit where you sat? And they said it's something they do with everybody, just to and it's, it's partially, okay, you're thinking about every decision, right? Every decision you make has a purpose. And B, they wanted something more than, well, this is where I thought you wanted me to sit. Right. So that's what that reminded me of. I love it. Did you run into any surprises? Did anybody pop a surprise on you? Like, I can envision you doing that, and some guy who's like, he's been in the corner outfield and first base or whatever, and he just runs behind the plate. Turns out he's got it on, he's ready to catch.
No, it's of course every first year infielder ran a short, right? So that's always that's always what it is. No, there weren't any major surprises. There wasn't anything that was out of it. The thing that's been really cool is anytime we've taken a player and say, hey, we're going to do X number of reps, again, use the example of pop-up priority, X number of reps, run out to your favorite position, like in Little League. And then me or Dan, be like, hey, move here, go there, go there. Like, they've never even asked a question. They're just like, okay, like, they just go do it, right? There's not even the head tilt of what, like, he's got me going there. It's just okay, and they just go. So it was, I wish there was something. I wish I had a better story of like, Vince Samini just went and put on a skull cap and a mask and just went behind the plate just to mess with me to see what was going to happen.
I hope you get one of those. If you continue to do that every preseason, I hope you get one of those. It's inevitable, right?
I'll blame the recruiters for not giving me a good heads up on their skill set if that were to happen, right? Like, wait, what? You told me this guy was a center fielder. He went to first base. Like, yeah.
Stylistically, again, this is a first-year head coach in a new space question. At Wofford, you guys were typically very athletic and you liked to run a lot. Is that and maybe this has changed over time because you did it that way for so many years. Is that more a reaction to the personnel? Is that a stylistic choice in which you would like to play no matter who you've got in the lineup? And is that something that is going to be carried over to BC now as they had some athletic play, of course, and varying from year to year, right? It depended, but they've had some base stealers, some really good ones there over the past several years. How do you see that sort of, and it could be, the base running could be one thing, Todd. Anything else that comes to mind about sort of what went into the identity of your Wofford teams? How much of that is going to be present with your BC teams?
So I would tell you in 5 to 6 years, I would tell you we're obviously recording this so we can go back, right? And I would tell you in 5 to 6 years, we would like this team to have very similar traits to what those teams had. And I say it all the time, we're all just a product of our experiences. One of the things that was really the most important thing is when we really bought in and really went 2 feet into the deep end on that style of baseball, it was sustainable, right? It was a sustainable model of success. And so it's not necessarily what I like or what I think is cool or, what has sex appeal. It's the reason that I'm so bought into that style of baseball is because it had sustainable, consistent success. That's really where I think it really came to fruition going through the interview process, where ultimately we landed on Dan and Ryan. But it was, you go through these interviews and one of the things that was so attractive about Ryan and attractive about Dan is their teams won. They won more with them than they did before they got there, right? And I have a ton of respect for Brett. I have a ton of respect for Kaz. But just like JJ, we had more success with JJ than before we hired JJ. And yeah, Jay can sit in the cage and he can break down a swing and he can do, but what's the ultimate objective? The ultimate objective is to win. So to me, when I was going through the interview process and guys are like, I believe in this, I believe in this, I believe in this, it was almost like I had at the forefront of my mind, is this helping your program win? Is it not what feels good in the cage or not what feels good in the pen? Is it helping you guys win? And when everybody asked me why we landed on Dan and Ryan, who, by the way, were our top choices all along, the reason we landed on those guys was because their programs were winners. And so there had to be something in what they were doing that was more than just what was surface level in terms of what they instructed. So that's a long way of saying, yes, we would like to get there eventually. What we have here today is there are some guys who are really athletic, who are really good athletes. Cam Leary is a phenomenal athlete. Barry Walsh is a phenomenal athlete. Cole Mercado can really run. There's some guys in there that can really do some things, right? Like Sam McNulty and Vince Cimini run better and are more, the word I use is spry. They are more spry than I anticipated, right? Maybe they're not a 6'7" runner, but they have some anticipatory skills. They have some reactionary skills that you just can't see on film. And so, yeah, are we going to try to use that style and that blend? But of course, but I'm not going to cram a certain style of baseball into guys that it doesn't fit their skill set, right? And I say this with all the respect in the world. It's very apparent that the position players here at BC, the honing beacon of theirs is bat speed and power. There is so much bat speed. This batting cage is as loud of a batting cage as I've ever walked into. There is some serious bat speed in this cage. And so I would tell you that you could tell that was very apparent in their recruiting. right? From Mike all the way down to Kevin and to Tyler, and then even back to Trez and to Murph, and then obviously with Sully here the whole time. Whereas you could tell that was kind of where they were going towards, where at Wofford we were going towards, the athleticism, right? And the speed. So I don't think it's a difference in level. I don't think it's a SoCon to ACC thing. I think it's certainly just a recruiting philosophy thing, right? Where that was what they were going after. And then ironically, the position player group that's here as freshmen, Tony Humphrey, Austin Hartzell, Esteban Garcia, Nate Frederking, and Adam Magpock, they're more the athleticism side. So it was almost like there was a shift in philosophy to go get those guys, right? Where those 5 guys fall under what I would consider, right, like a Wofford umbrella. So it's really interesting. You could just kind of see, even though you weren't in those conversations, you could just kind of see the mindset of what the recruiting philosophy was. So, I mean, I guess, we have a year head start, right? Because those guys that are freshmen that are here, they fall under that umbrella that we're going to try to go towards.
Last thing for you. It's another big picture first year question. Go figure.
Yeah.
What are the conversations, rather? I'll say it this way. What are the conversations around expectations, and how do those differ? Because, I mean, you had set a standard at Wofford, right? The expectation had become win the league. And you guys did it 3 years in a row prior to your jumping to Boston College. You had a lot of success with that. It's a little bit different, right? Now that you're in your first year, you're in a league that is very, very, very competitive. So, you know what I mean? It has changed for you, right? You can't just walk in and be like, "Hey, we're the class of the league. We we're going to win it." It's a little more complicated and a little more nuanced than that, right, Todd? So how have you had the conversations with your team about expectations?
Well, I've done the really genius thing and just not talked about it, right? Like that's it was we had this conversation. We did it at Wofford for 15 years, and we brought this philosophy to BC, but we do like a leadership cabinet. Instead of doing like captains, we do what we deem a cabinet, and we have members from every class. And our cabinet here at BC is 8 deep. We're getting ready to go to 9 because we're going to add a first year player. So, and I walked in and I asked them the same question. And I said, "Hey, look, I'm just telling you from experience. We would walk in January at Wofford, and we would say, we have 3 individual objectives, and they are all separate. Number 1, we want to win the regular season. Number 2, we want to put together a resume that is worthy of an at-large bid. And then number 3, we want to win the tournament." And those are all separate entities, right? We don't value one over the other. We value them all equally. We can't focus on winning the tournament until we get to the tournament. When we go play Winthrop on a Wednesday, that has no impact on us winning the regular season, right? So we just try to compartmentalize it. And I said that to the guys at BC, and I go, "What do you guys want to do?" And they gave me the same look that I'm giving you right now. And it's, you've got to clearly define it, right? Like one of the things that I try to do, and if I ever feel like I misstep as a head coach, it's because I have not clearly communicated expectations and I have not crystallized our thoughts. That's 95% of my day when I think about baseball. That's all I think about. How to crystallize communication and crystallize our mindset. And so I did a lot of digging, right? I did a lot of digging in terms of, I knew what it took to get to the postseason as a SoCon mid-major team, all the way down to what your fielding percentage had to be. And I did a lot of digging on what you have to do here. And there's just it's so funny because it seems so gray when you start digging into it. And then when you really dig into it, it really becomes pretty black and white of what you have to do in order to get to the postseason here. And I brought those numbers. I brought those numbers to our cabinet. I said, "Okay, This is what you have to do. This is your overall win total where it has to be. This is what your ACC win total has to be. This is where you have to pitch. This is how you have to field. This is how many bases you have to create as a base running team. This is how you have to and it all broke it down like, okay, every single postseason team that comes out of the ACC has these characteristics. This is our new standard. And they were like, how do you know that? And I'm like, well, you just get bored at 11:30 at night after your kids and your wife are asleep, and you just, you go down the rabbit hole of those things. So it still is, you want to clearly define it, but it just has to match where you're at, right? And to your point, we set out every year, we're like, yeah, we're just, our objective is to win the league. And we did it 2 years in a row. We did not do it in 23. We did it 2 years in a row. We did it in 21 and 22, and then played for the championship in 22 and 23. And so now it's just redefining and clearly defining what you need to do here in order to get to the postseason, because that's the ultimate objective.
Yeah, I love it. There's a lot of player empowerment in what we're talking about. In some of the things we've gotten through today. I think that's a great first step, or great, they are great steps among your first however many you've made. I mean, now there are plenty of steps. It's hard to say you're on your second step, and you've done a lot of things to get the ball rolling there. But you get what I'm saying when I say that. I've enjoyed this, man. This is good. I'm looking forward to more of these conversations. I'm excited to see you lead BC going into this 2024 season and for the years to come. So Todd, thanks again for the time. Best of luck this year. And I know you guys are down in the Carolinas a couple of times, so we might cross paths during the year, but we'll obviously be here every week, Danny and me talking about it. And who knows, we might occasionally spring an invite on you to come talk with us.
That was my next comment. You got all my contact info. Anytime you want me or one of our staff members to jump on, the answer will be an auto yes. So love just anytime you want.
We appreciate that. All right, Todd. Thanks again. Best of luck, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Thanks, Darren.